So we are in chapter 13. This is the chapter that is discussing at this particular point in time why it is that even though a Benoni will have an experience of feeling so connected and so aligned with what Hashem wants, and they'll be completely committed, and they won't do or say or even think anything which is contrary to what Hashem wants. And yet the question is, how come the Benoni has to view themselves ke-rasha, similar to a rasha? And we have spent a little bit of time unpacking that. We're not suggesting that the Benoni has to have some kind of a breakdown when looking in the mirror and saying, oh wow, despite all of my efforts and my investment and my personal growth, I am a rasha. We're not saying that. We're saying that the Benoni has to have this consciousness ke-rasha, that their fundamental internal spiritual workings are similar to that of the rasha. Meaning what? Meaning, here we are. We've got somebody who is so spiritually advanced that it's actually very, very impressive to us. And in fact, were we to meet, and we've discussed this a few times, were we to meet a Benoni, we'd be completely in awe of their greatness and their development and their connection to Hashem and their commitment to Judaism. And yet, we say they are ke-rasha. They have some element of them which is similar to rasha, meaning they still have that voice that continuously pushes in their mind saying, maybe you should try this. Maybe you should do that. Maybe you should sleep in one morning. Maybe you should avoid coming to the Tanya shir one week because, you've been so busy and tired and who knows what. So they still have that voice in their head as the rasha does. Difference is the rasha succumbs to this voice and the Benoni does not. And we're going to speak a little bit about that as well again this evening, please God. But one of the things that we saw last time was that it is just a fact of life. The longer we live on this planet, if we are not a tzaddik, we are naturally inclined to become more materialistic. Because every single day that passes, we feed ourselves. Which part of ourselves do we feed? We feed the body. And we feed the desires of the animal soul. That's just the reality of living on this planet. And so as time goes on, so we become more inclined to things of the here and now, which are an interference to our spiritual development. So the Benoni works very hard and is very focused and self-disciplined and does all of the right things, and at the same time keeps feeding that part of him or herself that is going to constantly create spiritual obstacles. Okay, so that's really interesting and valuable information to know. This evening we're going to start our conversation with that person. You know that person? That person that you look at and you say, there's no way that they ever do anything wrong because they have no time for it. They are completely invested in Torah learning. That's what they do all day long. They are immersed. They are focused. They simply don't have enough time to do things which you're not supposed to do. They say that the Rebbe would say about his Hasidim, my intention with my Hasidim is to keep them so busy that they don't have the time to do anything wrong. So on a practical level, that's really good. I mean, you know that from your own experience. When we are really busy, we don't have the luxury of doing things which we're not supposed to do. It's when we have too much time on our hands and we have too much downtime, that's when we are most susceptible to inappropriate choices. And this is a really practical thing. You can see this even with children. If you can keep your kids busy, they won't fight with each other. Everybody knows that when it comes vacation time, when school is off, everybody knows that's when you've got to be on guard because that's when the kids are going to start causing trouble and complaining and nagging. That's the nature of human beings. So if we can keep ourselves really, really busy with good things, then we won't have the luxury of focusing on not so good things. So what happens if we've got a Benoni who is not only developed, not only in control, not only disciplined, not only focused, but they are invested. They spend their time learning Torah. Well, we're going to look at that person. We're going to say there's no way that person could ever do anything which is contrary to what Hashem wants. And that's true. But one theme that has developed during the course of this chapter is you cannot determine where a person is holding spiritually just based on what they do or don't do, even what they say or don't say, even what they think or don't think. And this is particularly relevant for introspection, because our job over here is not to be able to look over the shoulder of the next person who we believe is actually quite spiritually advanced and say, I actually read some Tanya, and I know that you're not as good as you think you are. That's not the purpose. The purpose is that we should be able to look at it in the mirror. Even the Beinoni should be able to look in the mirror and say, hang on a second, just because I'm doing all of these things and I have mastery over my behavior does not mean that I actually have mastery. This is a really important topic for us to discuss, and we're going to unpack it further, please God, in the course of this evening. So if you have the Tanya book in front of you, we're on page 56, and specifically just before the end of the third line on the page, okay? So page 56, just before the end of the third line on the page. I'm going to pop it up on the screen for everybody to see. And we're going to start talking about the Beinoni, who is just so connected and so focused and doing what they should and davening and learning, etc. So let's have a look at this personality. I've just got to go back a little bit over here. I thought I had it at the right place on the screen, so just give me a second to get it to the right place on the screen. There you go. So if you're looking on the screen, it is on the fifth last line that you can see on the screen. It is the third last word. Again, in the book, it's on page 56, the third line and the third last word. V'af, even, mi shebesoiras Hashem cheftzoi. Even if you're dealing with a person whose interest is Hashem's Torah. Now, that's an important description over here. We're not only talking about what the person does. We're saying it's their chayfetz, it's their interest. Their interest is to learn Torah. And when we say that it is their interest to learn Torah, we don't just simply mean that it's their interest to learn Torah because it's a subject that interests them. When we say that somebody has an interest to learn Torah, our implication is that they are interested in learning Torah in the service of Hashem. Not just simply to learn Torah because I'm interested, but to learn Torah because that's what Hashem expects of me. So this person, not only do they have that interest in learning Torah, but more than that, not only is the person interested in studying Torah, but they are engaged in learning Torah day and night, which incidentally is the fulfillment of the mitzvah. The mitzvah is v'hagisa boy yomam v'layla, that we have a requirement that we're supposed to learn Torah every single day and every single night. In fact, the Gemara even goes one step further than that to teach us that the majority of a person's accumulation of knowledge will actually happen at night. Bear in mind, the whole system of day and night was a little different in those days to what it is for us, because they would, it got dark outside, that was night. They didn't have a nightlife that was competing with Torah learning. They didn't have to worry about what TV series was going to be on, if they were going to a restaurant, or if they had to catch up on their WhatsApps or their emails and like that. When it was night, it was night. So therefore, when the Gemara says that the primary time for a person to learn Torah is at night, that is because the person would not have distractions. Now, here we're talking about somebody who has so much interest and so much appetite for learning Torah that they actually do learn Torah day and night. This does not suggest that they don't hold down a job, that they're not earning, but it means that within every free moment that they have, whether it be during the day or whether it be at night, they are completely invested in learning Torah. We look at that kind of a person and we say, wow, you're a Beinoni, you have this level of self-control, you are not doing, saying, or thinking things which are contrary to what Hashem wants, and you're learning Torah all day. Now, we make a big mistake. When we see somebody who's learning Torah all day, we make a big mistake to think that because they are learning all day long, they are naturally in a different space to us. Now again, going back to something we discussed previously, as long as we are willing to put people on fictitious pedestals, subconsciously we are creating a reason why we do not have to be at that level. If we see that somebody has made spiritual progress, but we believe that they made spiritual progress because they are special, then we say to ourselves, and I'm not special, so please don't expect that kind of spiritual progress from me. And that's counterproductive. So when you see a person who's sitting and learning Torah every single day, what information do you know about them? You're seeing that they're learning not just a shiur or a download or a podcast, but they're actually invested in learning Torah day and night. You see this person. What information do we know about them? We know that they learn every day and every night. What information do we typically assume about them? We assume, wow, if somebody is learning Torah with that level of dedication day and night, they must be at a whole different spiritual level to me and possibly do not have the same or similar kind of challenges to what I have. That is a mistake. That's conjecture. We don't know that. Likewise, if the Benoni looks at themselves in the mirror and says, look at me, I learn Torah all day and I learn Torah all night, and I have a tremendous degree of self-control, and therefore I don't do things which are contrary to what Hashem wants. I don't even say things which Hashem would not approve of, and I don't even think things which are not aligned with what Hashem wants. So you look in the mirror and say, I must be a tzaddik. That's why we have this reality check. You cannot judge a person's standing just based on what they're doing. This is what we said last time, that self-control does not indicate mastery. So let's understand, let's go further. Ein zoi hoichacha klal, while we have evidence to the fact that this person is incredibly dedicated to Hashem and they've worked on themselves a lot and they have grown and they are learning Torah in all of their free time, what we don't know is Ein zoi hoichacha klal. This is absolutely no indication. It is no proof of what fact? Shenitche hora mimakoymoi, that the negativity inside this person's reality has been displaced. I don't know. I don't know what somebody feels. I don't know what internal challenges they have. The person themselves might go through a period of feeling so in control and so on top of things. And we all know this from our experience because we have it in small measure. But we all have this in our experience where we go through patches where we think, you know what? I don't know why did I used to struggle so much? Why was it always so difficult? Look at me now. I'm coasting along. I'm connected. I'm doing the things that I always intended to do, and I'm learning, and I'm davening, and I'm performing mitzvahs, and I feel like I'm growing spiritually. You can't take a dipstick out of one patch of a person's life and know factually, objectively, where they are holding. You can't. So here you've got a person. What's happening? They're learning Torah all the time. They have focused their minds. They have focused their hearts. They have focused their behavior. What do we know? All of that. Does that mean they are now immune to anything negative? Does that mean the negativity within their system has been completely expunged? Not at all. And it is quite possible. Now these are words that the Alter Rebbe is going to repeat again shortly. It could be that the very essence of the negativity, hu betokvoi or bigvurasai b'mekoymoi b'cholol hasmoli, is still as alive and as powerful as it always was in that segment of the human makeup where it lives, which is what we call the so-called left side of the heart. What does that mean? So previously, when we spoke about the difference between the perfect and the imperfect tzaddik, one of the things that we discussed is the difference between having law and order or rehabilitating criminals. So when you have law and order, effectively, no criminal is bold enough to show their face on the streets because they know that there's going to be the long arm of the law that's going to catch up to them, and then they're going to sit a long sentence in prison. So the reason that they're not misbehaving is for fear of what's going to happen, for fear of consequences, which is useful for society because it just means we'll have a safe society. But at the end of the day, what it doesn't help is it doesn't actually change the nature of the society. It changes the experience of the society. Okay, so it's really important that we are able to distinguish that, right? To be able to tell the difference between the reality of our experience versus our reality. Let's take this a step further. What would happen? And this is something we can all relate to. What would happen if you had an individual who was a crime boss or the head of a terror organization? And we allowed ourselves to believe that because they hadn't committed a crime, or because they hadn't perpetrated a terrorist act for X amount of time, that must mean they are no longer criminal or terrorist. Now, every one of us acknowledges that that would be a terrible misjudgment. That's where we land up in the most trouble. That's when we land up the most vulnerable, the most exposed, when we believe that a lack of action indicates a lack of threat. You can never make that mistake, right? Here's another example. Let's say that, God forbid, a person had a dread disease and they were treated for that dread disease, and now they are, thank God, they've been cured. But the doctor tells them that every X amount of months, they've got to come for a certain kind of a checkup just to make sure that the dread disease isn't trying to return. So they do this. They do this for the first year, and they do it for the next year. And after 3 or 4 or 5 years, they say, you know what, doctor, every year we come for the screening. Every year the screening is clear. We don't believe there's anything to worry about anymore. And the doctor says, are you crazy? You are now going to expose yourself. If you're not being vigilant, if you're not looking out for something which we know to be latent in your system, then one day, God forbid, it's going to catch you. So we understand that in every other area of life, the fact that there is no visible evidence of an immediate threat does not clarify that there is no threat. Here you've got a Beinoni. The Beinoni looks in the mirror and sees an individual who for so many years has been so focused, doing all of the right things, behaving the right way, studying Torah in every free moment, dedicated to Hashem as can be expected. The Beinoni should never now make the mistake of thinking, you know what? Whatever negativity used to be part of my system clearly is no longer functional, because look how good I've been. Look how well I've done. Therefore, the Alter Rebbe identifies that we have to understand the difference between the actions and the mohus and atzmus. The actions of an entity versus the essence of that entity, or the nature of that entity, the reality of that entity. Rak shelevushav shemachshava dibur u'maaseh shel nefesh habahamis. It's just that in the context of the Beinoni, it's the levushim, the garments, which are what we call thought, speech, and action of the animal soul. Einon mislabshim b'moyach v'apeh v'hayodayim ushar evrei haguf. These so-called garments are not able to take hold either of the person's mind to make them think inappropriately, or the person's mouth to make them say things they should never say, or the person's limbs in order to get them to do things they shouldn't do. So we've now made a very important distinction. We've spoken about levushim, and we have spoken about mehus ve'atzmus. We have identified that there's the principle of clothing, and we have identified that there's the principle of the essence of something. Just yesterday, somebody asked me how come it is that at a Jewish funeral, the mourners tear their clothes. And there are various explanations that are given, but one of the explanations is that it's a reminder of the fact that the body is only like clothing to the neshama. So in the same way as a person can tear their clothes and it doesn't affect them, it upsets them, obviously, and one of the reasons we do this is because psychologically it helps us understand or confront the fact that we're in a state of grief. But more importantly, it's a reminder that you could rip these clothes, discard these clothes, and you will still be you. So the neshama is able to remove the body and still be a soul, which is effectively the essence of the person. The significance of that metaphor is that whenever we describe something as clothing, we're describing something that is non-essential to a person's survival and therefore can be completely changed or exchanged. Let's say that you have a particular item of clothing that means a lot. It's quite sentimental. I don't know, it's a wedding dress, it's a garment, a suit that you wore at your university graduation. I don't know, everybody has a reason why a particular item of clothing might be very important to them or very sentimental to them. and then something happens to it. So it could be something terrible and radical, like it gets burnt in a fire or stolen. Or it could be something far more common, which is you don't fit into the clothes anymore. So at that point in time, there's a momentary crisis. Oh my gosh, I can't believe I used to be able to fit in this item of clothing and now I'm not able to fit, and what's happened to me, and blah, blah, blah. But then we get on with life, because we can survive without the item of clothing, which indicates that the item of clothing is not essential to us. It's an accessory to us. Whereas there's certain parts of ourselves that are very, very deep. They're very personal to us. So if, for argument's sake, I'm walking down the street and somebody says to me, "Why are you wearing that funny little hat on your head?" which happens occasionally to Jewish men, then I could say, listen, if you think it's funny, that's your issue. To me, it is significant, and it's a reminder of higher authority, etc. I'm not going to be shattered because somebody didn't understand what a yarmulke is. Whereas, let's say that a person went to a meeting, a business meeting, and shared a whole proposal about how they believe that this business should run. And somebody comes over and says to them, "That was the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. Not one word of what you proposed is worth anything." Well, then a person's going to be deeply insulted and literally injured. Or if somebody had to come over and say, "I think you are a useless person, or a lowly person, or a rotten person, or a dishonest person," any of those things, we're going to feel diminished. We're going to feel undermined. We're going to feel abused. That's the difference between a garment and something which is part of our reality, part of our essence. A garment is very important, very valuable. If you don't have the vehicle, if you don't have the interface, if you don't have the clothing, you actually cannot engage the world. True, fact. But it's not you. It's not who you are. It's what you use in order to engage the world. Therefore, you can never judge a book by its cover, a person by their clothing, or the success of spiritual development by behavior. Because behavior is what we are doing, or even saying, or even thinking. But there is still the we who is doing it, or saying it, or thinking it, which means it's not my essence. When the Benoni assesses themselves, they're able to identify, look, I don't do things that are not authorized by the Torah. That means I'm in a good place in behavior. I don't say things which are misaligned with God's wishes. Therefore, I'm in a good place with regards to speaking. And I don't even allow myself to entertain thoughts which are unhealthy spiritual thoughts. That means I'm in a good place in my thinking. Not one of those tells me what my reality is. That tells me what my experience is. My experience is I do the things I'm supposed to, and I avoid the things I shouldn't. My reality is that there's still a crime boss living inside my system. And that crime boss is waiting for the nick in my armor. It's waiting for the opportunity when we turn our heads and we don't pay attention to our border, and the next thing they can infiltrate. That is my reality. And it's incredibly important for a person to recognize their reality. So the Benoni is instructed to view himself Rasha, like a Rasha, meaning my reality is no different to the reality of the Rasha, even though my conduct and my experience is radically different to the conduct and experience of the Rasha. So let's unpack a little further. Where do we see the success of the Benoni? Because we have to recognize that success, celebrate that success, but not allow that success to be overblown so as to create potential vulnerability. So where is the success? Mipnei Hashem. Remember, earlier in this chapter we said that what gives the Beinoni the capacity for success is that Hashem is on his side. It was like the panel of three judges, and it's the third judge who's going to swing the opinion or swing the conclusion of the court. So I've got the two voices inside of me, the Yetzer Tov and the Yetzer Hara. The Yetzer Tov is telling me to do all the right things. The Yetzer Hara is discouraging me and trying to push me to do the wrong things. And it's Hashem's voice that helps to lean in the healthy direction. Therefore we say, Mipnei Hashem. It is thanks to Hashem who assists this Beinoni. In what way? Well, the first piece of support that Hashem gives us, the first resource that Hashem gives us is that our minds are designed to control our emotions. That is so helpful. If we were not given that tool, it would be near impossible for us to be able to stop ourselves from doing things that we shouldn't do. So thankfully, Hashem built this into us. He gave us the edge that we have a mind which is a developed intellect that has the capacity to control emotions. Other living beings don't have this. And we've already touched on this multiple times. It's the mosquito who cannot turn and say, I'm going to find another victim because this person I've already attacked too many times. It's not possible. They don't have that level of intellectual processing to be able to distinguish between one kind of behavior and the other. And we do. That's the gift of being human. So we have a brain that is able to assess things objectively. We have a brain that is able to look at the value of things versus the loss if we either ignore those things or if we choose to prioritize other things instead. So that's a gift that Hashem gave us, and it's that gift that allows the Beinoni the possibility of control. Because Hashem set up the anatomical reality and the psycho-emotional reality of a human being, that the brain has the capacity and the power and the potential to direct and to control and to harness the heart. Therefore, in chapter 9, we learnt that the Nefesh Elokis, the godly soul, primarily engages the human experience through the brain. And the Nefesh HaBahamis, the animal soul, primarily engages the human experience through the heart. So if the brain is designed to have control over the heart, that means we are given the edge that the Nefesh Elokis, the godly soul, has the capacity to harness, control, and focus the Nefesh HaBahamis, the animal soul. Therefore, the Nefesh Elokis, the godly soul, which is created to engage the human being via the brain, via the intellectual process, because the Nefesh Elokis will encourage us to look objectively, factually at what is worthwhile and what should our priorities be. That's why in the case of the Beinoni, who has done the work to access the power of the Nefesh Elokis, therefore what happens in the case of the Beinoni is the Nefesh Elokis, the Neshama, is in control of the so-called minor city, which is the metaphor we used in chapter 9 to describe the human experience, where there are these two kings, these two forces, each vying for control of that experience, of that city. And who gets to have the upper hand? The Neshama. Why does it get to have the upper hand? Because the Beinoni works so hard so as to deserve Hashem's assistance that this could work. So, therefore the Nefesh Elokis is capable of having power and control over every part of the human body. Sheyiyu levush umerkava lishloishes levusheha. That which garments will the body wear? In other words, which interfaces will the body use with the world? Healthy ones. Godly ones. What kind of thought process will this human being choose? The kind of thought process that is aligned with Hashem. Why? Because the Neshama has taken control of this person. Which emotional attributes are going to be associated with the connection to Hashem? Which emotional attributes are going to be associated with the human experience? Those emotional attributes that attach us to Hashem. Because the Nefesh Elokis, the godly soul, is directing what the practical usage of thought, speech, and action will be. And what that means practically is that means that the body is going to be completely and consistently invested in thought and speech and action that is associated with Torah, with mitzvahs, with doing what Hashem wants. But that is practically. But the essence of the neshama, ein lo shlita memshala al mehusa ve'atzmusa shel hanefesh habahamis bebeinoni. So I told you we're going to come back to this expression mehus ve'atzmus, the very essence, the reality. So this is the key to understanding what a Beinoni is and how a Beinoni is fundamentally different to a tzaddik. Behaviorally, Beinoni is on track all the time, to the extent of being so incredibly impressive to the rest of us. But inherently, intrinsically, the mehus, the essence of the animal soul, is not controlled or directed by the essence of the godly soul. Let's understand that. So let's go back to our crime boss or terror leader. Let's use them again as an example. Unfortunately, some people learn the hard way that if you try to be tolerant of or nice to people who hate or want to harm you, it doesn't usually help. In fact, the contrary, what we think is tolerance and inclusivity and kindness is perceived by people who are malevolent, malicious people as weakness. So you can't be nice to the Nefesh HaBahamis. You can't be nice to the Yetzer Hara and say, you know what, Mr. Yetzer Hara, I know you're just doing your job, and your job is that you're supposed to distract me and you're supposed to give me some kind of, resistance so that I'll become a stronger Jew. Therefore, let me indulge you. It's like the person who once said it in yeshiva. He once said to the rabbi in yeshiva, he said, it's not such a big deal for me not to watch movies. What's the big deal? I have no means to watch movies. This was in the days before handheld smart devices, right? So I have no way to watch a movie. So he says to the rabbi, I think what I should do is I should go to the cinema and sit in the cinema with my eyes closed, blocking my ears. Because then I'll have the temptation of watching the movie, and I won't watch the movie. That'll be a far greater achievement. What do you think the rabbi told him? It's a meshuggah. It's the most ridiculous. That is the most ridiculous suggestion. That is the equivalent of the person saying, why should I sit in my house and have security on my home? What's the big chap of that? Let me rather go into a seedy neighborhood, carrying my wallet in my pocket, and then make sure that I don't get mugged. That would be an achievement. Yeah, of course it would be an achievement, except more likely you'll get mugged. The same thing, you try to put yourself in the Yetzer Hara's path, and more likely you'll succumb to the Yetzer Hara. It's not smart, it's not a strategy. So, coming back to our conversation over here. So we said, imagine you've got this crime boss, imagine you've got this terrorist leader, and you think that the correct way to behave towards them is let's include them, let's be nice to them, maybe they've got some real hang-ups, and if we could give them some therapy, then they won't be so hate-filled anymore. It's a high-risk approach, and ultimately, they say, if your enemy says that he wants to harm you, believe him. If the Yetzer Hara says that it wants to trip us up, believe him. That's what the Yetzer Hara wants. So therefore, what do? We build up our defenses, we shift our focus, we develop a lot of time, a lot of effort, a lot of investment, in order to be able to reach a point where that voice of negativity is no longer able to take control, but it's still a voice. So practically, in all of the levushim, in all of the interfaces that I use in order to engage with this world, can't see or hear the criminal anymore. All you hear from this person is davening, learning, speaking in a way that encourages other people, doing things that they're supposed to do, thinking in a healthy way. But the mehus, the essence of the threat, remains the same. Because we don't have a mechanism for the essence of our neshama to override the essence of our animal. We have a mechanism called moyach sholit al halev, that the mind is able to control the heart. Controlling something does not mean it is now a different entity. It just means I have control. I remember at one point many years ago, we were in New York, and we were there for the Kinus HaShluchim, the annual gathering of the Shluchim in New York. And the group that I was with, we decided we wanted to go into Manhattan to go to a kosher restaurant the one evening. So we arrived, and where the kosher restaurant that we went to was nearby Toys R Us, Olav HaSholem. I said, Olav HaSholem. It's no longer around. And we arrived over there, and there were people standing in line. They were standing in line a city block, and then around the corner another city block at whatever time it was, 7 p.m., 8 p.m. or something like that. And we wanted to know what was going on. You know, us naive people from South Africa, we'd never seen anything like this. You know, people lining up at night outside a retail shop. And there were some people over there who had like little tents, and they had fold-up chairs, and it was like a whole business. What was this all about? The next day, Nintendo was launching a new game console. And they wanted to be there, the first people through the door to get the game console. I don't remember which Nintendo it was, but I do remember this, that the marketing that was obviously all over the place for this particular thing, the marketing said, "You are the controller." So it was obviously some new technology that they'd come out with, where instead of using just a regular joystick or whatever you might have used to control the game, this was, again, I don't know what the console was, but the idea was that you become the controller. You're not using a device, you're not using a joystick, you become the controller. You are the controller. So let me ask you a question. Instead of a piece of electronics that you're using to move, so that your little character on the screen does what it has to do, if you're moving and that's what's causing the character to move on the screen, is the character now human? You are the controller. It's not a device that's the controller. You are the controller. So if you are the controller, is the controlled now something different? In other words, the little being on the screen, whatever it is, the tennis player or the little Mario character or whatever it is, are they any more advanced now that you are the controller? No. They are exactly what they were. They're bits and bytes that are designed and programmed to work in a particular fashion. Zehu. Their mehus, their essence, their reality is no different, no better, no upgraded, just because you are in a more controlling position. Moyach shalit al halev. The mind controls, and the word that we use in Hebrew is on the heart, in implying superiority over the heart. So if the mind controls the heart, is the heart now a different mehus? Is it a different entity? Is it a different being? Is it a different organ? Does it operate with a different system? No, the heart is a heart. And the nature of a heart, certainly the conceptual heart that we've been describing in Tanya, is that it is impulsive, it's excitable, it's self-interested. None of that changes. It's just that the moyach is sholit al halev. The mind is the one who is the controller. That's the reality of the Beinoni. The reality is the heart is still a heart. The animal is still an animal. The Yetzer Hara is still a Yetzer Hara. But thank God the neshama has taken control of the space. So once the neshama has taken control of the space, the animal behaves like a human-controlled animal, not like a wild animal. Instead of being a bull in a china shop, it's an ox pulling a plow. It's still a behemoth in every sense of the word. Its DNA is animal DNA. But because there is a strong, focused, intelligent controller, it is now beneficial to the system. So when I look at the person, I think, wow, look how well they have done. Look how well they manage themselves. Look how focused they are. Look how disciplined they are. Look how connected to Hashem they are. All of the above is correct and true. But the essence of the adversary is still adversary. Give it half a chance. Give it one little sign of vulnerability. It will be up in a moment, as Gary said, sleeping dragon. Just because it's asleep doesn't mean it's not a dragon. Just because it's conforming doesn't mean it behaves or wants to behave. The only time that a Benoni has that experience, and this goes back to something we discussed earlier, where we said there are certain times where a Benoni can feel what it is like to be a tzaddik. So the only time, ki'im, the only time where things change fundamentally, and the actual nature of the impulses inside the Benoni are completely transformed, that happens on those rare occasions where the love that the Benoni has towards Hashem flares up and is conscious and is tangible and is something I feel and experience. And that only happens be'itim mezumonim, at pre-allocated times. Special times. Doesn't just happen on a whim, or if you happen to be lucky, or you were sitting in shul and they blew the shofar and the next thing you got goosebumps, or because the rabbi said something in his drosha and it really resonated, or because you were singing a nigun and it was nostalgic. It's something completely different. This is a itim mezumonim, times that the person has pre-allocated to work, to focus, to invest, to meditate, to contemplate, to arouse an awareness of Hashem that is within their system. And that typically happens, that typically happens in the experience of prayer, focused prayer, not the kind of prayers that we typically do, which is, rattling it off and just getting from point A to B, or as they say in the classics, from Hoidu to Kush. It's when we're focused, it's when we're invested, it's when we get ourselves into the correct headspace. So if somebody is a Benoni, and they have that level of self-development and growth, and they have that level of self-discipline, and they are focused to keep their mind and their heart and their mouth and their limbs aligned with what Hashem wants, and then on top of that, they have a profound experience of davening. In that profound experience of davening, temporarily the Nefesh HaBahamis will transform. And that will set the Benoni apart from us yet again. But that's not a tzaddik. And as we'll see next time, please God, not only is it just short-lived, but even in that short period, it's not plain sailing. Okay, so Gary's question is that what King David achieved? We will discuss King David at some point, but suffice it to say that King David is a tzaddik, and therefore what we're describing over here about a Benoni would actually be quite limited relative to what King David achieved, even though we use the expression by King David, Velibi Cholal Bekirbi, that he was able to excise the negativity from his experience completely, but that's exactly what a tzaddik is. Somebody who has excised the negative completely, as opposed to a Benoni, who only has some level of control and brief moments of temporary transformation. So it's really, really important that we're able to know the distinction between people who are tzaddikim, that no longer have any internal struggle, versus a Benoni, who is somebody who has incredible action, behavior, alignment, but still the possibility of intense internal struggle, because the mehus, the essence of the adversary, is still as powerful as before. Okay, valuable information. We're not yet finished with this topic. We'll continue it, please God, next time.